Hey, what's up guys? Thanks for tuning in. Beside me is the brand new Bird Aeris AM, a 160mm travel enduro bike that is using Bird's most advanced carbon fiber frame to date. Stay tuned to find out how it rides and learn all about it in this review on loamwolf.com. Yes, so this is a brand new Bird Aeris AM. It's their 160mm travel enduro bike with what they're saying is the most advanced carbon fiber frame that they've yet to make. It's a carbon fiber frame that in the size medium large comes in at 2.6 kilograms without the shock and is built to be strong enough to support hard enduro charging. So it's certainly a reasonable weight, but also the levels of kind of finish and refinement are all there. And they've really made a really nice high quality product that I think is quite a step in the right direction, a really good step for them to have made to really push their bikes to the wider market. Up until now they've been doing a fairly good job at providing direct consumer bikes in the UK at really good prices, and obviously you see a few of them popping up around Europe, but up until now they've not really quite gone super big time, I wouldn't say. But I think they're hoping, and I think that they have a good chance of certainly seeing a bit more international success with this bike, because it is really up there in terms of its overall quality and also in how it rides, but we'll get onto that in a little bit. This is, as with all of their bikes, it uses their horse link suspension system. They tune the kinematics so that it has plenty of pedaling support, as well as being nice and progressive, so you can run an air shock like we've got here, the Super Deluxe Ultimate, or a coil shock on there if you prefer that kind of feeling. And yeah, certainly in terms of all the features on there, you've got a water bottle cage for room for a huge bottle in the front triangle. They've given you an additional tool mount up near the head tube on the down tube to fit a tool or extra accessory that you want. And they're also going to be supplying these frames with custom made frame bags to sit in that pocket up by the head tube, which should make it nice and neat and a really kind of refined finish to the storage of tools and extra items on the frame there. As standard, the Aeris AM is designed for a pair of 29-inch wheels, but there's also a flip chip on the horse link pivot on the chainstays that lets you quickly flip it into a shorter chainstay mode and modify the geometry so that you can run a 27.5-inch wheel in the back, making it a mullet setup without messing up the rest of the geometry, so everything remains constant apart from that rear end length, which gets a bit shorter to pair well with the smaller rear wheel. And the front end is designed for a 160 or 170mm suspension fork, depending on what your kind of preferences are for stability and agility, and yeah, just generally how you want the geometry to be. Speaking of the geometry, you've got a 64-degree head tube angle as standard, a 77.5-degree effective seat tube angle on this size medium long, or R3 that they're calling it. So they've actually offered a 5 size range with their wingspan geometry concept. So they go from R1, which is effectively a small, through R2, and then to R3, which is a medium large or medium long, which kind of it offers a really nice kind of gap filler between a conventional medium and a conventional large, because obviously around about this height you have the most riders. We are medium people after all, medium to large people, so having that medium long, medium large size in there means that there's a better likelihood of riders in that kind of average height range getting the exact fit and feel that they want. And then it goes up through the R4, which is a large, to the R5 is an extra large. Each of these sizes have a 25mm reach gap, so starting from about 430 and going up to just over 500mm for the extra large. So certainly, because the gaps aren't too big between sizes, every rider should be able to find the fit that they want. And also across the range, they've gone with low seat tube lengths and nice and low standover heights, so every rider should be able to effectively size up without running into issues with clearance on the descents. Other geometry numbers include the 30mm bottom bracket drop, which gives a roughly 340mm bottom bracket height. There's a 440mm chainstay length in the 29er mode, which shrinks to 429mm if you're running the smaller 27.5-inch wheel out back. And stack heights are fairly low across the board, which does offer a little bit more versatility, because obviously you can always fit a higher rise bar like the 50mm Bergtech unit I've got here, but does create quite a low front end if you don't. With the medium long here, the R3 coming in at a 627mm stack height, which yeah, is certainly on the lower side of things and did lead me to having to fit that higher rise bar to feel comfortable. But yeah, it's certainly not a crazy number that's going to cause any issues for most people. To begin with, Bird is only offering the size R3 that I'm tested here for immediate purchase, and that'll be delivered in October, they're expecting. And then other frame sizes can be pre-ordered for delivery slightly later in the year. And they'll be offering it in this black colorway, as well as 2 more colorways which they're yet to unveil. But certainly if you're in the market for this bike and you pre-order it, you'll be able to choose between the colorway once they're released later down the line. The early bird deal on the frame, which includes the RockShox Super Deluxe Ultimate RC2T air shock that you see here, is 1,995 Great British pounds. This will obviously have various different conversions around the world, and then you'll have to factor in shipping costs, but it's safe to say that for the high quality frame that you get here, it's a fairly reasonable number, and comes in much less than many of the other carbon fiber frames on the market, if not almost all of them. And it's quite impressive because the level of fit and finish on there is quite incredible. And further down the line, they'll be opening up other build specs using their custom builder on their website so that you can get the spec levels dialed in to exactly what you want. Initially, Bird was showing this bike built up with an XXSL spec, so it was a very much kind of more towards the long-legged trail sort of style build, with very lightweight components all around, but they had that coming in at about 28.5 pounds, or just over 13 kilos, I think, which is quite incredible. This build here, as you see it, is something fairly standard that they'll be offering, except for I have swapped it out for some nuke-proof Horizon Pro wheels that I've got on test, V tyres with a downhill core and GXE core casing, the Enduro casing on there, and then I've swapped out the handlebar as well for one that fit me a little bit better. And even still, this came in at a fairly respectable 32.5 pounds, or 15.5 kilos or so. So it's a fairly impressive lightweight overall package that you're getting here, albeit with some slight compromises made with the Lyric instead of a Zeb, and things like the 2-pot Formula brakes, which all help to shave a little bit of weight. But there's no denying that this is an enduro ready build, and that weight is really quite impressive. Now that we've covered all the build specs and the options you'll be able to get, let's talk about how it rides when we took it out onto the trails. So we were very lucky to get the Bird Aeris AM first out of pretty much anyone to test, and it's been quite a privilege taking it on the trails around Scotland to really get to the bottom of its performance. I haven't had it for a super long time, about 2 weeks, of which I've not been able to ride it every day by any means, but I've managed to get a solid amount of ride time on it across a very wide variety of terrain across Scotland, and it's safe to say it's been a huge amount of fun. The first kind of standout thing when I picked up the bike, or actually when I first saw it at the Ardrock event when they were showcasing it for the first time, is just how dialed it looks. It's a really kind of big step up. Not that their bikes have been looking terrible in the past by any means, but this is really a bike that they've kind of made a big push to clean up the lines, just make it look a lot more kind of refined overall, and they've done a great job of that. And it's seriously a good looking bike in the flesh that has been getting quite a lot of compliments out on the trail for very good reason. Getting the bike set up initially is nice and easy with the RockShox suspension on there, because you've got the sag gauges on the shafts of the fork and the shock to let you easily get them set up to the right sag for your body weight. And then from there, it was just a case of getting the rebound and compression settings dialed in to make them feel about right, which actually turned out to be a little bit more of a process than I was expecting. The RockShox models these days certainly feel very heavily damped, which is normally really what I like, but when combined with the overall package here on the Aeris AM, it did feel a little bit on the harsher side. So I backed off some of the settings, got things feeling in a little bit more of a comfortable place for me after a little bit of experimenting, and then it was just time to go and get some miles up and down the hills to really see how it performs once it's set up to your preferences. Obviously, with those suspension units on there, you've got rebound and compression settings, high and low speeds, so you can really play about with them to get things feeling and reacting how you expect or how you would like. So it's by no means a fault of the suspension, it's just that potentially the kind of default settings that they recommend, or the settings that I ended up opting for initially, were a little bit too much on the damped side, which yeah, certainly affects the riding characteristics of the bike. Climbing performance on this thing was quite impressive, so because that overall weight is so low, even with the downhill tires, it definitely makes for a much lighter, more active, more agile and quicker off the line bike than I was not necessarily expecting, but than what I've been used to testing recently. I've been riding some pretty heavy alloy bikes recently, which have their own benefits for sure. But yeah, certainly it made this feel on the way up the hill much more like a trail bike than an enduro bike. There's plenty of support in that pedaling platform without it being ridiculous, but it's certainly nice and firm when you're on the power, especially when you're seated. Yeah, just overall it felt like a very efficient and nice climbing machine. And then by the geometry overall, certainly the seat tube angle, because the actual angle is slacker than the effective, it's something that I say all the time. I've got very long legs, so by the time the saddle ends up at my saddle height, which is, you know, I've got 80 mil or something of dropper, a long dropper, a 200 mil dropper on there, poking out the frame, so by the time you get up to my saddle height, the slacker actual seat tube angle does push me further towards the rear of the bike, which meant that when it got to the steepest stuff, I did feel that it was a little bit too far off the back for my preferences. End up sitting on the nose of the saddle, pushing the saddle forward a little bit in the rails. But it's by no means a problem with the bike. I don't think I am just proportioned slightly differently to a lot of people, which does always lead me to having slightly more rearward seated positions unless companies go crazy with the actual seat tube angle and make them super steep. So yeah, other than that, climbing position felt pretty good. The balance between the front and the rear wheels is good. It's not crazy. I wouldn't say that the rear end length at 440 mil is super long or necessarily perfectly balanced for the front end. It definitely feels like one of the bikes with a slightly shorter, more compact rear end, which of course has its own benefits on the way down the hill as well. But it does mean that once you get to the absolute steepest stuff, when combined with that slightly slacker actual seat tube or effective seat tube angle for my height, I did feel like there was a little bit less weight on the front wheel, especially once I'd fitted the slightly more comfortable higher rise bar, which yeah, certainly pushes your weight back even further. But that all paid dividends on the descents, which we'll get onto next. For the descents, Bert hasn't gone crazy with the geometry of the Aeris AM. It is definitely a slightly more well-rounded machine than some of the bikes that we're beginning to see in the category, which go crazy with like super long rear ends, super slack head angles, extra long reaches. Albeit I am on the R3, a lot of people would tell me to go for the R4 based on my height. But yeah, with bikes there is definitely a lot of preference, and the slightly shorter, the 475 mil reach of this R3 is about right for me. I'd maybe go a touch longer, but for sure it's been a comfortable bike to test. But yeah, because Bird hasn't gone crazy with the geometry numbers, this isn't the ultimate like stable straight line plowing machine, especially when combined with that lower overall weight, which does lead to a slightly less stable bike just in terms of like how it reacts to the trail, because the chassis doesn't inherently keep itself planted with that kind of e-bike feeling quite so much. Wow. But overall, the extra agility that you get from the kind of mild geometry, not crazy geometry, plus the low weight, means that on mellower trails, especially when you have the suspension set up with a lot of compression damping on there, you get a lot of feedback through the bike, which means you can work the terrain really well. And then combined with that slightly more agile overall package, it means that yeah, flow trails and just more tight and technical, maybe slower speed, yeah, just a lot of the trails that we have here where you're winding through the trees, it makes them a lot more fun, a lot easier to navigate, and just makes for a really good time overall. And then when it gets to the descents, the kind of real gnarly stuff, this thing does hold its own pretty well. It's probably not the absolute most kind of isolating bike from the trail compared to some of the, you know, coil sprung, alloy framed, super long bikes. It does feel like you need to ride it slightly more actively to get the best out of it. And also the rear end, even though it's 440mm on paper, and actually 440mm when I measured it just to double check, it does feel slightly shorter than that, meaning that you can get the front wheel up nice and easy to unweight it for obstacles, to just pop and play around, which makes for a lot of fun. It doesn't make it absolutely the most kind of turn your brain off and just go ultra fast down the trail bike. You do have to be slightly more mindful to keep the balance, to keep the weight on the front wheel. But it's by no means a bike that's hard to ride fast. It just maybe requires a slightly more delicate touch than some bikes in the category. But what it does mean is that with the agility, with the good climbing manners, overall this makes for an incredible all-rounder. It's maybe not a bike that you'll win a pure downhill stage timed race on it, but it is a bike that you'll be able to take out on long days in the hills. You'll be able to pedal up kind of slightly less gnarly terrain. You'll be able to take it out on the slightly less gnarly days and not hate life. But then when it gets to the gnarlier stuff, it'll still hold its own, just maybe not put you quite at the front of the pack when it comes to absolutely charging through the roughest and rowdiest stuff. Overall, I think Bird has done a fantastic job, especially when you consider £1,995, including that high quality shock on there. It's a pretty killer deal, and overall the package is super dialed. It's been super quiet as well. That's one thing I should definitely mention. They use clamp ports for the cables. They use really nice VHS tape on the chainstay to keep the chain noise to a minimum. And there's just not been a single pop, squeak, rattle or anything. And when you combine a chain that's not flapping around like mad, cables that are well managed and not flapping around, it removes some of the vibrations from the trail that otherwise can lead you to feel like the bike is maybe not quite so smooth, basically this thing has been incredibly smooth and dialed, and really adds to the overall quality feeling of the bike, and makes for a very pleasurable time trying to push hard on it. So kudos to Bird. I think they've done a killer job on the Aeris AM, and I think it's a bike that a lot of people are going to really enjoy. And I hope it does very well for them, because it's been a serious amount of fun for me to test. Thank you so much for tuning into this video, guys. I hope you've enjoyed watching it and learning a little bit more about this brand new carbon fiber enduro bike, the Bird Aeris AM. Give us a like if you enjoyed the video, leave us a comment, let us know what you think of this bike, and subscribe to the channel to see more awesome content on awesome bikes like this. Thank you for tuning in. Catch you out on the trails.